The word text has changed its meaning totally as the result of those verse numbers. Originally, text, the text of the Bible, meant the whole Bible. And in normal English, it still means the whole of a book, the text of the book. But in Christian circles, the text has come to mean one sentence in a book, one verse. And we've started throwing texts at each other so often out of context, and we've missed the real meaning of the text because we've taken it out. I've already said this to you, but I asked you earlier in the week, how many of you could tell me John 3:16? And pretty well all of you put your hands up. And then I said, how many could tell me John 3:17? And if I remember, about 7 or 8 hands went up. And I said, how many could tell me John 3:15? And there was an equally small number. And because you don't know verse 15 and verse 17, you will not understand verse 16. The most important word in verse 16 is so. And it doesn't mean God so loved the world, as if so is spelled S-O-O-O-O. And it doesn't mean God loved the world so much. The word so there means thus, in the same way. So that's how God loved the world. And the word so should come between for and God. For so God loved the world. And that word so is saying he loved the world in the same way as he did. And that refers back to verses 14 and 15. And what God did in verses 14 and 15 demonstrated his love centuries before, and then, for so God loved the world. Same way. And when you read the verse 14 and 15, you find that God had sent poisonous snakes that were killing off the people of Israel because they had grumbled about the food that God provided. And when they begged him to take the snakes away, he said, no, I'll give you an antidote to the poison of the snakes. You got to do something. When you're bitten by a snake, you go up the hill to where Moses has put a metal snake on a pole, and you go and look at that. And when you do that, then you'll find that the poison will leave your system. And then it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Because verse 15, Jesus said, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so, same word, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. You see how the context is so important if you're going to understand a text. But those verse numbers mean that we look at just one text and quote it as if we know it. I'll give you just one more example of this. You must have heard of the saying, a text out of context is a pretext. Well, let me give you another example. Here's a text I've heard quoted this week here. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Have you heard that verse? I heard it quoted here this week. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I want you all now to think of something you can do because Christ strengthens you. Anything at all that you couldn't do without him, but you can do with him. Think of something that comes in the category of all things that you can do through Christ who strengthens you. Okay? You thought of something? Put your hand up if you were thinking about money. Nobody. But in fact, that verse is about money. It's about managing to live on the money you get. And Paul is saying in that verse in Philippians, he's saying to the church at Philippi, I've learned in whatever state I am, therein to be content. He said, if I have a lot of money coming in, I'm content. If I have a little money coming in, I'm content. The opposite of being content is to be covetous or greedy. And it's greedy people who can't manage their money. And isn't it amazing? The more they have, the more they want. Contentment with godliness is great profit, said Paul. And he knew it. Now, I am going to churches and asking churches in Britain, asking the congregation how many of them are in debt. And in the average church in Great Britain today, 1/3 of the congregation are in debt. And to be in debt, according to my New Testament, is stealing. There are two ways to steal money. One is to steal money from other people, and the other is to withhold money from people to whom it belongs. And when you get into debt and get behind with payments, you are robbing people of money that belongs to them. It's serious. It's a sin in my New Testament. Now, don't get me wrong. You maybe have a mortgaged house. You may be paying for the car bit by bit. That's not debt. Debt is when you get behind with the payment and you owe money to the other that you're not giving them. And that's stealing. So here is a text. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which means I can manage on whatever money comes in or doesn't come in. And you notice that the reason he could do that, because he was content. Some of the poorest people in the world that I've met, in India, for example, living on the streets, they're surprisingly content. They've always challenged me because they are so content. It's a great gift to be content with whatever you have and not want what the Joneses have down the road and not envy what others have and not want to keep up with them and not respond to every advertisement on TV you see and be content and not want so much. Actually, in Britain, everybody in Britain is now living above their income. Everybody. Because the government is in debt, because they are borrowing money every year. They actually borrow £1,000 for every person in Britain to keep up our standard of living. And you're now in the same boat, and your national debt is shooting up. And it's to keep you in your standard of living. And as soon as our government said to the British people, we've got to cut down, we've got to pay our bills, and we've got to cut down our standard of living. Now we're getting protests and riots of people who don't want their standard of living cut down. And we are living on our grandchildren's money. They're going to have to pay it back. I think that's wicked to be stealing from your grandchildren, but we're all doing it. And Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, whether I've got a lot of money coming in or little. I'm content. What a statement. And doesn't that become a relevant text now to all of us? So it is those text numbers which have made us into text people. And we quote a text like that and a verse like that, think we've quoted it properly. We think we've understood it because we've ignored the verses around it. Because we can quote chapter and verse for a particular statement in the Bible. Sorry to labor that point, but it's a very important point with me.